Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Rhombus Tix. I'll be reading for you today. Chapter 18 of Micronation. Amberlove. Amberlove found it difficult to decide upon a sensation similar to being in a sensory deprivation tank, primarily due to the fact that there were no senses upon which she could depend to equate the equation thereof. There was nothing like bobbing about formlessly in order to release stress. The odd thing was that she had kept her memory, even though she had lost her identity. No, that wasn't right. She knew exactly who she was. What a stupid statement. After all, hadn't she just said that she had kept her memory? No. As she had been saying, the odd thing was that she had lost her ability to really decide for herself what it was that she was going to decide. How did anyone decide anything at all, really? What were the components that came together to make an I into I'm going to do something? These thoughts were quickly brushed aside by the voice from beyond, which directed her to craft another mean. The voice told her to say very bad things about Fleur. Since Amberlove wasn't really Amberlove anymore, Amberlove did what the voice told her to do. The thing that Amberlove didn't understand was why the voice needed Amberlove to restate the thing that it had just said, and then, of course, Amberlove knew that it was because the voice wanted a meme crafted. Her memory told her that she had been brought here by Colonel Salamander once he had found out who she was and what she could do. He had spoken at great lengths about all kinds of techniques learned from years of experimentation at breaking down an individual's will. She tried to remember the details, but then a warm, pleasant feeling spread over her, and it became unimportant. What was important was saying what the voice wanted her to say. Destroy Fleur. Her voice formed the words as her lungs expelled the words from her body, based on the neurons sent along her central nervous system from her brain, which might or might not exist, depending on whether or not the voice said that it did. For Fleur is an evil place. Listen to your leaders. Obey your leaders. Trust your leaders. Do not question your leaders. Even as she said the words, she believed them with all her heart. She was the mouth of the voice, and if she could not speak for the voice, then who would? Touch was a sense that was difficult to remember floating in the tank, but she found that she could still feel the vibrations of the words inside her head. She thought, therefore she was. This gave her a sharp but intense pain just at the base of her spine. Amberlove knew that she wasn't supposed to think such things, and her body betrayed her. When her body betrayed her by manifesting her stress, then a technician in the nice room below adjusted one of the many wires or intravenous tubes filled with drugs. Of course, she remembered hearing the technician, but she had never actually seen him. She'd assumed it was a him because of the voice. That didn't mean the hand of the voice were the same, which was silly of her, but then again, she did silly things sometimes. She knew deep within herself that she should probably have listened to Chester. Then again, Chester was okay. If she had not gone back to undo some of the damage she had done, would Chester still be okay? It was hard to know the unknowable. Something twisted and rebelled inside of her. Even though it was impossible, so the voice told her, her innermost core refused to forget who she was, at least entirely. She whispered faintly, so faintly that those hearing could not hear with their conscious minds, but those whom the meme was directed could, between the cracks of their great perceptions. Buy Kissalt perfume. Act just like they did on TV. Do what everyone else is doing. It hurt to think like that. It hurt to be. Yet she had no other choice, for if she failed at this last glimmer of hope, she would be lost. And she could not allow herself to do that. It felt hard, for it was hard. She could barely even remember that it was important to get away, much less that there was a reason to do so. She held on, somehow, but each moment was more difficult than the last. If she did not get help soon, there would be no more hope of resistance. It did not help that she was beyond time, for without the ability to sense her surroundings, she had no idea of knowing if an hour had passed or if it had been a month. Theoretically, they would have to feed her, but the tubes might be doing that instead. She doubted they were too worried about her muscles atrophying. For a moment, she thought she heard something through the glass of the tank. It might have been her imagination. Her mind filled her lack of senses with all kinds of phantom things, shadows of what was not. A landscape of gummy white mountains filled the webbish mindscape of her horizon. Back, she reached to a time before the benevolent surgeon had cut her brain a second time to give her mastery over her sleep. Hypnagogic hallucinations manifest themselves when she was bound by paralysis. She was beyond it now, and yet it was her anchor. These vivid, realistic images gave her shelter against nothing in which she had been imprisoned. Time passed. She felt several assaults against her mental refuge, but the bastion held. More time passed. She tried to imagine a clock, but had no reference to which to compare. All she could do was count. She kept losing track between 30 and 40,000. She tried this several times, but found it difficult to focus after that. Flowers began to bloom, and a white-hot sun moved through the sky. The light was welcome and was proof against the darkness. For a moment, a hideous pain beckoned her at her right wrist, but she held to her haven, and it helped her. The sun set, and the moon rose. Stars shone from the sky, and a few of them became shooting stars. One by one, they fell to earth. She made a wish, and the stars in the sky became cracks in the glass. Light, true light, was not the warm, faultless light of her mind, beamed into her eyes while the water dripped from the tank. Comet fall became gunfire, and she was swept out past the glass and plastic into the gooey tile below. I opened my eyes and felt like myself again. I wasn't sure what they had put into me, but it was pretty powerful stuff. I made a mental note to never get captured again. Not that I had ever intended to get captured in the first place, mind you, but you get the idea. The room was a lot smaller than I was expecting. It was really more of a closet than some kind of a vast chamber where dozens of technicians had been monitoring my ever vital function. It took a while to clear my head. I could barely move, but I wanted to stand. I needed to stand. With every ounce of willpower I could muster, I pulled myself up the metal frame of my former prison. I heard someone shouting at me, but couldn't make out the words. I didn't see any other people in the room with me. The light was very dim, but there was a light shining in my eyes from the floor. What was a travel pod doing here? Were they going to try and sell me muffins? Yet as I looked at the little light a bit closer, I realized that it wasn't a normal travel pod at all. It was much meaner looking. The thing practically bristled with guns, and it had treads instead of wheels. At first I thought it was here to kill me, but the tone of voice kept telling me that it was my friend. Then again, the voice had been rather friendly too, and I knew now that it had been lying. What was a girl to do? I tried talking to it, but I could barely move my lips without drooling. That was rather unseemly, and I didn't want to look unkempt. In retrospect, I doubt I should have worried much. After what was probably the 800th time trying to get through to me, I heard a voice of a man on the other end. "Can you hear me? Nod if you can." I nodded. "Good. There is someone here who wants to say hello to you, Amberlove." Hello. It was Chester. He had come for me. I had known he would come for me somehow. At least, I had hoped he would. For once in my recent history, I was pleasantly surprised. I mumbled a greeting, but could not form coherent words. "Amberlove, can you walk out of there?" "Hell no." I groaned something that conveyed the proper message. It probably sounded something like, I'm afraid I don't remember all that clearly. "Amberlove, can you hear me?" "Yes." That was a good sign. "Good. Very good. Listen, we've used a lot of droids to get control of the building. Sending people in is going to entail a lot more risk. If we have to do that, people are probably going to get killed, and we don't want that. Can you stand?" "No." "Well, at least she's honest. Hold on a second. We'll get back to you." I was not happy at the silence. I wasn't entirely awake, but I was indignant enough that my rescues were more concerned with my rescue than my emotional well-being. I mean, sure, "I love you," or "You are a sex goddess," or even a simple "How are you feeling?" "You must have gone through a terrible ordeal. We'll get you out of this" would have done. Where was Darla? She wouldn't have put up with this nonsense. Finally, Chester's voice came back through the droid/travel pod. "We've got an idea. Can you lie down flat?" That I could do. The travel pods quickly formed a ring around me. Two of them shoved something flat and metallic under me, and then they shoved something flat under me a second time. It took me a few seconds to realize what they had done, but somehow they had woven an impromptu stretcher beneath me. It was brilliant. Down through the hall we went, slowly and tentatively at first, but at some point they must have gotten their act together because the stretcher stayed light and we began to increase speed. I occasionally heard Chester's voice in the background offering assurances that everything would be all right. I couldn't hear much at first, but then I heard a cry of alarm somewhere down one of the halls, followed by an immediate dart of sniper rifle. "What?" I managed to get out. We weren't able to get everyone out of the building after all. We've tranquilized one guy, but it's only a matter of time before someone finds out. He also cost us 4 minutes because we're going to have to go around him, but don't worry, help is on the way. And just like that, they backed me up and around several more corners. We raced through pristine halls and straight into a cargo elevator. The elevator itself opened and we went inside. I guess they had either hacked into the system or had more of their little robots controlling things. The ride up the elevator took forever. My heart raced faster. I tried to move a few of my muscles and get to my bearings. These travel pod things might be fast, but something told me that there was a little more than that was going to be required. I could feel the stretcher they had me on bend and adjust a bit when I did this. At first, I thought I was moving and I was going to make them drop me, so I stopped. But after a little more time, I tried again and they held me just fine. The elevator doors opened and we raced down yet another hall. I slowly began a series of mental exercises trying to control every muscle, starting with my legs and moving my arms. I didn't feel atrophied, though. At the time, I wasn't sure what that would feel like anyway. I tried raising my head, but still felt very dizzy. Whatever they had been pumping into my veins was still taking its toll. We stopped for a moment and then went down a flight of stairs. I couldn't help but scream, since it felt like they were going to drop me. They didn't drop me, and I felt very embarrassed. Everyone is still outside, Michael Onyx said through one of the travel pods, but please don't do that again. Please be calm and relax. We don't have time to tranquilize you since we're not going to be able to put that into your system. We don't know what they put into your system. Well, we can't have you screaming like that again. Sorry, I mumbled. I was sorry, but I was also pissed off. The nerve of them thinking about tranquilizing me. Don't tranquilize me, I murmured. I wondered if I could make a meme when I could barely talk. It was worth a try. Of course we won't patronize you, Chester said. No, there's no trapeze in the complex that we're aware of. You know what I'm saying. Of course we're not going to go in all guns blazing. I could tell by the tone of voice that he understood every word I was saying. I swear, sometimes I hated him. That was, of course, when I wasn't busy mooning over him. Sometimes I hated myself. We moved through some kind of kitchen area and onto the back of the truck waiting on the loading dock. There must have been 100 of the little travel pods by now, which raced up the ramp right after me and into the truck. They made a ramp with a plank mounted on some of the food crates, then the truck started. My heart began to race. It was one thing to be carried by a few cute but very advanced remote-controlled cars. It was something else entirely to be in a truck that somehow I knew was being controlled by remote. When I am in a moving vehicle, I want a person at the wheel. I tried to protest, but found my words jumbled again. How in the world had I created memes for the cult if I couldn't talk? Wait a minute. That made no sense. They might paralyze my body somehow, but surely that wouldn't inhibit my speech. But a bunch of people were afraid I'd been brainwashed, could have. In a flash, I could move again and talk, but I didn't say anything. I was in a desperate situation, but wanted to clear my head. Could Chester have done this? I didn't think so. He hated memes, which meant that Michael Onyx, this person, was responsible. He had a lot of crazy robots around me with guns and darts and who knew what else. He wasn't someone I wanted to be on the bad side of right now. He was, after all, trying to rescue me. The car jolted. At first, I thought it was a speed bump, but then the car continued to jolt up and down. Something was wrong. I decided to accidentally roll forwards towards the front so I could get a better view of the front. It wasn't easy, but I managed to do it. Unfortunately, I couldn't see anything but glints of daylight, telephone wires, and the tops of a few buildings from where I was. I sat up. I didn't care what Michael Onyx did at this point. He could dart me, but he certainly couldn't memes at me. And, actually, he did have reason to be afraid. I could get them to do an awful lot before I went out from one of their little dart guns. And turning down the volume wouldn't stop them from reading my lips. I suspected even my body language might work. In fact, given some of the experiences I'd had with people who didn't speak English, I was pretty sure body language had an awful lot to do with how the whole thing worked in the first place. As soon as I stood up, I was thrown back into the body of the car, landed on a travel pod, and felt something sharp and pointy near my flesh. I didn't think it was intentional on their part, but unfortunately it didn't draw blood, but it did help me behave in a slightly less foolhardy fashion. Once the car smoothed out for a bit, I moved in front to take the driver's seat. After a few seconds, I wished I hadn't. There were 6 security guards at the checkpoint in front of us, and all of them had semi-automatic rifles pointed at us. Almost as if they were a trained drill team, they brought their rifles to bear, aimed, and fired. The glass of the windshield shattered in 1,000 different places, and I cut my hand as I drove back from the ground. The guards continued to fire at us, but their gunshots went from the front of the truck to the side, and then through the back window. The bullet holes in the walls were only a couple of inches from my face. I guess they had orders to shoot to kill. That's okay. I was giving myself orders to shoot them too. I said, if I pull one of these travel pods and it pointed at the people following them, can you shoot them? We can do better. We can give you manual control. Any experience firing a gun? I went to a pistol range once with a former boyfriend. I think we'd probably better keep control from here. If you can grab hold of something and raise one of the drones, it would help us. The metal of the car is too thick for us to drill through. Rather than ask them what that meant, I grabbed the drone closest to me and held it up in the air. It immediately began to fire behind us, shattering even more of the shattered glass. The sound deafened my ears, but I heard a lot of screeching tires and breaking glass in the distance, so I was pretty sure I was doing some damage. I didn't plan on sticking my head up above the window to find out. The travel pod was getting heavy to hold, but it kept shooting, and at one point I heard a tire explode. Several of the travel pods chuckled, which was very disconcerting. Intellectually, I knew that they were probably being operated somewhere remotely by real people, but it sounded like they were insidious little machines that gloried in death and bloodshed. That they had saved my life helped, but only so much. I tried resting part of the machine on my head, but it hurt my neck. I did have a little bit of atrophy, and after a while, I simply couldn't hold it up anymore. It got off one more shot before it clattered to the floor. I heard all of the laughter go silent. For a second there, I thought I'd broken it, and then I realized I couldn't have broken all of them. It got too heavy, I said guiltily. What? One of the travel pods admitted. Oh no, sorry, it's not that. We're watching the cavalry. What cavalry? Oh, sorry. Here, look. The screens of one of the travel pods showed an aerial view of something that looked somewhat like the drones the military used for reconnaissance, but they seemed more streamlined. They were also, very obviously, and more heavily armed. Won't they have their own drones, I asked. Not like these, the technician on the other side said of the link as she chuckled. The drones fired on several cars that were pursuing them, causing one of the cars to burst into flames. I felt horrified. These people were dying because of me. How many of these monsters worked for the Cult of Innocence, and how many of them were just soldiers or police doing their job? The truck turned a sharp right. One of the travel pods flew back and slammed into the side of the wall while I desperately flailed about looking for something, anything to hold on to. I managed to grab onto the cargo strap and held on till my knuckles were white. I heard very heavy gunfire outside, both from above and below. I could hear the drones roaring back and forth at incredibly fast speeds. Then I heard one explosion, followed by another. The truck that we were in slowed. The pain in my shoulder told me that I had probably dislocated it. I slowly stood up and moved to the front of the truck, knocking the travel pod in the driver's seat out with my good hand. How long do we have? I asked. Long enough to get you out of this and to the rendezvous point. I said, as long as I'm not the one who has to hotwire the car, then I'm all for it. I opened the door and looked outside. When I saw an extremely narrow mountain road that we were racing along, I was very glad I hadn't been able to see it. I tried not to think about the fact that a toy car had been driving the bigger car the whole time. I tried very hard not to think about it. I heard a helicopter flying towards us. Is that one of yours? I asked hopefully. Yes, it is. There's someone who you should recognize on board. Of course it was Chester, not the screen, the real deal. Hello, Chester, I said, smiling awkwardly. The helicopter looked really weird, military clearly, but almost with like a stealth bomber had had sex with a Huey.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, at Amazon and other markets. RedAnvilCreative.com contains all our podcasts. Copyright
2022!
To fight the forces of evil!
Welcome to the secret commentary at the end of the episode. So This is an interesting chapter. If I had to bolt on an extra 7 chapters after the last battle where they defeated the ship, I would say that it's not bad. It's almost like a, made-for-TV movie sequel. Telling things from Amberlove's perspective, sure, slightly interesting. In fact, if anything, this one was actually well done enough that it almost tells me that I should have told the whole thing from different perspectives. It would have helped us get into the heads of other characters, even though Quiescence Prow's head is probably not a head I want to spend any particular amount of time in. Darla and Prow are very much support characters, and they don't have to be, because this really could be told from all 4 of their perspectives. Amberlove is very different from Chester, and I do a good job of changing up the voice. In terms of the details of it, I think honestly this is another example of, at this time, where I'm just willing to skip the hard parts of an action sequence because there's so many details to keep track of, and instead have them do the whole thing by robots. Now, in some ways, it does make sense for Hlur to use drones in mass numbers, because that's where they have an edge, and they don't have to risk people. And the one thing they don't have a lot of, compared to the United States or China or Russia / the Klingons, is people. But the idea that you can execute a rescue like this with just toy cars with guns on them is kind of nuts. And while that is kind of a manifestation of this chapter, I'm trying to go for at least somewhat realistic. And the satire elements is supposed to be more in the conspiracy side of things, and rather than the action side of things. And yet, I have never spoken to anybody in the military or law enforcement on this, but I'm relatively certain that if I talked to them about the idea that a bunch of toy cars were doing this, they would laugh at me. Now, could drones eventually do this? Absolutely. And since this is supposed to be the near future, if I'd written this now, I could maybe have some of those robot dogs, or, could a drone theoretically rescue a human being? Absolutely. Could they, as I described them in this chapter, even if they're travel pods with treads and guns instead of wheels? I don't think so. I really think that I must have seen Batteries Not Included too recently, or in my head. Just the whole action sequence has problems. Now, once you accept that these tiny little robot cars can do all kinds of things off camera, then yeah, it's okay. But the precept is frankly as ridiculous as the idea of world leaders making sure that they all have narcoleptics to help them generate memes. It just approaches the level of ridiculous. But and the problem is that if you're going for crazy, like the Illuminati trilogy, it's nowhere near the level of crazy it needs to be to actually just be straight up crazy. But overall, it shows a lot of potential. I just am embarrassed more that it's my second novel than my first, because the second novel isn't as good as the first, even though the first has a ton of flaws as well.